and welcome to another episode of Behind the Beacon, where we bring you the news behind the news. I'm Dara Lyons, Chief Revenue Officer at the Bucks County Beacon, joined by Emily Smith, owner and publisher, back for another conversation. Emily, how are you?
I'm good.
Good.
How are you?
Yay. Well, I think today we can talk about how the news is doing, because I recently had one of our readers, major shout out to Michael, not going to give your last name because I didn't ask you first, but Michael sent me an article from Dame Magazine about, the title of it is Can Treating Journalism Like Public Infrastructure Fix Our Broken Media? That is the title of the article. And essentially it does a deep dive into how the news used to be funded, how it's funded now, sort of like how things need to change in terms of the public framing of the news ecosystem in order to keep media vibrant. So I thought we could maybe just go through today, Emily, some of the points that the article makes and talk about those in light of the Beacon and what it means for us.
Yeah, let's go.
Yeah, awesome. So one of the first things that this article talked about was how the way that news media used to be funded is no longer viable, that the vast majority of news organizations were almost entirely funded by advertising revenue, and how that's no longer the case. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? And in particular, it was talking about how Google and Meta really took over as advertisers, filling the space that news organizations used to fill. So can you talk a little bit about how the ad landscape has changed and is changing?
Yeah, I think it's funny with Google and Meta, back when they started selling ads, they called it, the democratization of advertising.
Yeah.
Because anyone could afford it. And the problem with it is that it is all algorithmically based, and you're paying for clicks, and they work in the thousands CPMs.
Yes.
Clicks per thousand. So it's like impressions and clicks is how they do it. But because it's such a vast network, the cost is very, very cheap. So, you can run an ad on Facebook for $10.
Yeah. Right.
Obviously, a news organization cannot survive on $10 ads because we don't have the amount of eyeballs that Facebook or Google has, right? So Google and Facebook are working in billions.
Yeah.
Not even millions, billions or trillions. So for them, pennies work.
Yes. Right.
But for us, when we're in the thousands, the 10,000s, right, pennies don't work. For instance, we serve ads on our videos on Facebook.
Yep.
And we get paid for that. And I literally just got our receipt of how much money we made in May.
Okay.
It was $6 and change.
Yeah. It's not getting us anywhere, really. I mean, yeah.
No. I mean, some months it's $30.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But yeah, $6. So that doesn't pay for anything. I mean, it's nice to have it. Like, we send our RSS feed to Newsbreak, who serves a bunch of programmatic ads, like Google ads, on top of it. And we used to get a lot of traffic on there.
Yeah.
They've changed their format. So now most of that traffic goes to us rather than being in apps. So we're not getting that money. But like, now from Newsbreak, we get $50 to $100 a month.
Wow. Yeah.
Our best month, we got $2,600. So that was nice.
Okay.
When that happened.
Yeah. Right. Well, and I think it's interesting because, I think about this through our lens as a news organization that's paying people and producing news and all that. But I also think about this from an advertiser lens, and I don't know exactly how the Facebook ads translate to bringing people in the door. So for example, if I'm a local business that maybe has a storefront and not a huge online kind of, not a ton of online selling options, I'm going to get more bang from my buck paying like, I don't know, somewhere between $100 and $500 for an ad campaign on a digital news site like the Beacon than I would if I'm paying $50 on
Right.
Facebook, where maybe people who are seeing my ad aren't necessarily going to be people who are in my community gonna go down the street to the store and like buy something. They might not be as concerned with shopping local or any of those things. So I mean, I'm not trying to dissuade people from placing ads on Facebook or Instagram or what have you, but I do know that the conversion rates aren't always so great. And
Point 0.87%, I think, is the conversion rate.
yeah, yeah, right,
Yeah.
right,
But also, I think it's interesting because the companies that do the best with advertising on Facebook or Google or anything like that, their math is a different kind of math than the regular business uses, right? They look at their cost per acquisition,
right,
right?
right,
So they're like, it costs me $5 to get this customer.
right.
And from that customer, I get $20.
Yes, right.
And that's the math. And that's how they do it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like, it is very different than building a local community business that relies on repeat long-term customers, that kind of thing. It's a completely different version. That's
Totally.
what
Yeah, like, if I wanna buy supplements or whatever, like, the best place probably for me to go and the best place for that advertiser to go is Facebook, and I'm gonna, like, see or skincare, whatever, the
yeah,
19.99 for this thing, but if what if I have an art gallery, let's say, or I have
yeah,
a law practice, or I'm a tutor or something that wants to work
right.
in a local community, advertising on Facebook is not gonna be the place to do that.
No, no, and, like, there's so many bots. I mean, there's so much fakeness on
Yeah.
Facebook that I think is hard to overstate, like, there's bots everywhere and they're doing stuff
Yes.
to ramp up numbers and all that kind of stuff. So, a lot of it's real fake,
Yeah.
and then a lot of the users that you get, like, the eyeballs that you get on those ads, they're junk customers.
Right. Yes.
If they're real, they're junk. And it's just, I've done advertising on Facebook before, and the only thing I think it's good for is like you can advertise to your followers
Right.
and then their friends.
Yeah.
And that's the only way that I think that there's like a true value in it. And it's just about eyeballs. It's not about actually converting into sales, if
Totally.
that makes
Well, and then, when people are advertising in a local community news outlet, there's also the intangible benefits, which is a little harder, I think, to wrap one's head around. But like if I
Yeah.
own a store in a town, if that town has a news organization or a news outlet, chances are that the 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 public officials in that town are going to be held more accountable. So like perhaps the streets are kept cleaner, and their beautification projects and zoning is all like there's a higher level of standard in that community in terms of the care that people take in that community, because if there's any sort of miscreants going on or corruption or whatever, then that news outlet is going to unearth that. And so communities that have a news organization or multiple news organizations tend to be more well cared for and have greater civic information and engagement. And so in those communities, people tend to be more informed, and they also tend to care more about maybe not care more about their communities, but have sort of more agency within their community and potentially more disposable income. So there's sort of an indirect benefit where if I invest in my local news media outlet by buying an ad for my business, more people hopefully are going to walk in the door as a result of seeing that ad. But also the streets around my business, the crime rate, all of those things will be improved. And therefore, it will be more likely that I will get more foot traffic, that people will want to hang out in my town. So like there's that kind of cost benefit analysis that I think is harder to quantify, but is part of the equation.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's part of the equation. And also, like, the people who read the news outlet and approve of its coverage are more likely to support the local businesses within that same community that advertise,
Right.
you know?
Yes. Yes. So like a million and one intangible elements. And I know I'm speaking to the queen of data. Emily like loves data. But I think there's like qualitative and quantitative data, and there's
Yeah.
anecdotal evidence and like fact-based evidence. And there's just so many factors I think that go into things like this. And so, and then the other piece of it is, and this article by Dame Magazine, which we'll put a link to in the show notes, like they were citing the rise of sort of hedge fund acquisitions of journalistic outlets and the hollowing out of news organizations. And I think one of the things that I really love about the Beacon is that we still do fearless fact-based reporting. We do deep dives into issues. It's not a whole bunch of news briefs or recycled press releases that people are putting out. And so I think in that regard, not all journalism is created equal. And I would say not all journalism is journalism. Not all things that
Yeah.
people think of as journalism are journalism. And so I think funding local journalism, for me, there's a question between, or a distinction between funding local information and funding local journalism. And I think I see those two things as different. And perhaps because of my bias, I'm really invested in keeping local journalism going and thriving.
Right. Yeah. But I think it's also like worth noting about the hedge fund newspapers. So like, that would be the Bucks County Courier Times,
Mhm.
right? Like they're the local example of that. I think it's worth noting that, the amount of local news that's in there is depleted, right? Because they have national networks,
Right.
right? So then they use national reporters to cover the basic things.
Yeah.
So you just don't get the depth and breadth of local information that you would otherwise. And like, I mean, like the Courier Times, like I think they've got 4 reporters.
Yeah. Right. Right.
You know what I mean? I mean, that's like the reality of the situation, and none of the reporters are happy about it.
Right. Yes. And the readers, I mean,
They don't understand
yeah,
what's
the
going on.
readers don't understand, but also I think, there was a 2025 report put out by Medill on the state of local news that said that I think the top 100 United States newspapers have lost more than 45% of their page views over the last 4 years. So I think that people are getting their news and information from, and I might put that in in air quotes, because some of the information is great and some of the news is news, but some of it is just people's opinions presented as news. But a lot of people are going to social media, they're reading headlines on whatever, TikTok or Facebook or X or whatnot, and thinking that they're informing themselves, but often they're not. And so I think like the reduction of advertising dollars, the reduction of readership, the 75% of journalists are no longer able to be full-time, to make a living as a full-time journalist.
Oh,
So then you're getting, less news, less local news. Reporters are more scattered and they're having to churn out, maybe 10 articles when they were churning out 3 or 4, and being able to invest more time and energy in those articles. Then the articles are less in depth. So and then people's attention spans are shorter because of the rise of social media. So there's all these factors that are making it harder and harder for local news outlets to remain relevant and also sustainable financially.
yeah. I mean, I think the worst part is that people get their news from social media, but the the they think they got the news just by reading the blurb on the social media post and the picture with the headline.
Yeah.
The actual click-through rates to the news media are minuscule.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
So it's like, did anyone actually read it? You know?
Yeah. Well, and that's, I mean, if I'm picking up a newspaper, going to a news site, like it's because I want to read. I actually, prior to coming to the Beacon, I wrote a bunch of books. And one of the things that was really interesting was publishers would say, if you have like a social media following of 100,000 people or even 1 million people, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have a high number of book sales because those people aren't necessarily reading. So, so for them, it was way more impactful to have a newsletter list of, let's say, 10,000 people who actually read a newsletter than
Yeah.
100,000 people who follow you on Instagram, because those people might be more interested in pictures. And so, yeah, so I think it's about like, how do we get people reading or watching and paying attention and looking for nuance, like, and and while the tide is and the pendulum is sort of swinging in one direction, how do we news outlets remain present so that once people realize the downsides of not being informed, there is information for them to come back to, and the news outlets haven't been so hollowed out that that there is no such thing as journalism anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, like, from all of the news publications I know from around the country, from being in these different associations, lots of small publications like ours
Yep.
are trying to change the way that they deliver news so that people actually read it.
Yep.
And so that's, some of the stuff we do on social media where we have slides with the key points of an article. So
Yep.
they don't actually have to go to our website to read it.
Yep.
You know, it's like on TikTok, we have stories where we will condense it down into a script that's 30 seconds long,
Right.
and we read it and show pictures.
Yeah.
Like, we still want people to get the information, even if their bias sends them to being a person who doesn't actually read articles,
Right.
right?
Right.
Right, because the information is still important regardless of whether they are reading it, but we still are putting the articles out.
Yeah.
We are just giving it to them in different formats.
Right.
And I think that that is one of the major shifts that is hard to quantify,
Yeah.
because I mean, that's like all like the rise of the creators, you know.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of people don't use laptops or computers anymore in the same way. I mean, a lot of people are reading from their phones. And so even just
The
optimizing a
majority.
website for an iPhone or Android or whatever, like, makes a difference, because if people can't read it easily, then they're not going to read it. So there's that
Yes.
too.
Yes, mobile first. Yes, over 60% of every website is being seen on mobile.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is the majority way that people get their information
Yeah. Yeah.
is through mobile phones. That's it. Like, full stop.
Yeah.
So, like, anything that's like big on a big screen, yeah, we're building for that so that people can look at it on their website, but like look at it on their computers, but that's not how most people get their news.
Right.
You know, it's clicking through when they wake up in the morning, looking at their phone, looking at social media, like looking at their emails. That's it.
Yeah. Right. And then, people sharing and being in conversation about different things is also part of the equation. And, it's interesting because this Dame Magazine article was talking about how, like, okay, so 92% of ad revenue is gone. People aren't getting their news anymore. Page views are down. Like, how does journalism stay alive and vibrant in this time? And so they were talking about how 6 states in the US have begun to fund local journalism and subsidize journalism in those states. So Pennsylvania, spoiler alert, is not one of those states. There are some legislative measures. I know Representative Chris Rabb was, really advocating for local journalism, and there's several other representatives and, political officials, et cetera, who are advocating for state subsidized county subsidized funding of local journalism. And so this Dame Magazine article was talking about that and how it's been effective and or inadequate, in certain states. So that was one of the ways that they're talking about people stepping in to fill this news void and this information gap and make sure that journalism is relevant. So I thought that was really interesting. And then it was,
Yeah.
yeah. Do you want to say anything about that, Emily?
Yeah, we met with some people from the Pennsylvania News Media Association a couple weeks ago.
Yep.
Their legislative director and their, I don't know what she is, outreach director.
Yep.
And we were having a conversation, and that was one of the things they asked me about, was about, public funding for news outlets.
Yeah.
And, it seems to, they're for it, because more funding is always good, but they have gotten a lot of pushback from other members of the association. And so they asked my opinion about it. And it is a tough thing because it would be good to get money from the state to
Yeah.
fund it. Like, I mean, the whole point is that, Trump got rid of public media funding,
Yes.
right? So now states are trying to take up some form of public media funding. But that's public media, not private media like us, right? So then the question is, well, what are we funding? And that is where the question is how do you choose? And then you let the legislators choose,
Right.
right? You let the legislators choose who they think is the real news, the best news, the whatever, So then it comes down to this value question that, you know, who's to say how that's going to go?
Well, wait a minute, but I mean, if the legislators are choosing, and I'm not throwing shade on it because this is not the case in Pennsylvania. We don't have state
We don't have it.
funding.
We don't have.
So this is all hypothetical. But
Yes.
the Beacon, we cover different things that political candidates are doing, that elected officials are doing,
Yes.
some of which I think the public is really excited about, and some of which exposes certain, inadequacies, misdeeds, corruption, etc. And
Right.
so if I'm an elected official, Emily, I'm an elected official who's acting in good faith and operating above board, I'm going to want to make sure that a news organization like the Beacon gets funding. But if
Right.
I'm a bad actor or whatever, then I'm going to be very invested in funding a news organization that is not reporting on
Right.
what I'm doing. And in fact, a news organization that is probably either like a hollowed out husk,
Right.
of news. So if I send them press releases from my office, they're just going to regurgitate them and not
Right.
do any due diligence, or
Right.
a news organization that is perhaps, I mean, there are some organizations out there that are regurgitating misinformation and
Yes.
potentially on purpose. And so
Yeah.
if I'm, a ne'er-do-well, I'm going to want to be funding those organizations. So it does really create a problem. And then there's then suddenly news organizations won't want to report on certain things that are happening potentially if it's
Right.
a funding cycle that's coming up. So it's,
I mean, you have to think of it like Russia, right?
yeah,
Like, is it state funded news? What does that look like? Do you know what I mean?
right.
Like, and I think that that's the distinction with any of this kind of legislation is how the legislation itself is less important than the implementation of it in a
Mhm.
way that makes sense and is fair.
Right.
And, I think that, obviously lots of news organizations would like some money that they'd get automatically from the state, obviously.
Yes.
Yeah. But I think that the implementation of such a thing, if it passed, would be the entirety of whether it was valuable, you know?
Well, and it could be perhaps it could actually be destructive.
Yes. Yes.
But
Exactly.
but the point remains that the news organizations need more money, or there will be no
Yes.
news organization. So it's like
Yeah.
I don't know, catch 22 might be the wrong phrase, but states subsidizing local news is addressing a problem of local news organizations not having the funding that they need. It is
Yes.
potentially creating other problems,
Yeah.
but it is also addressing a problem. And so this article also pointed out like how philanthropy and local philanthropists have stepped in to plug some of the sort of funding gap that news organizations are facing. And as the chief revenue officer at the Beacon, a huge part of my job is applying for grants, meeting with local foundations and local funders to receive large dollar donations to support some of the work that we do. And I think that we've talked about this in the past, but grants often come with restrictions. Like we got some money to do environmental reporting, but that money must be used for environmental reporting. We got some money to, hire Ben Bennett to do education reporting in Lower Bucks, which is wonderful. And also, that doesn't help with our overhead costs necessarily. And so I think,
And there's a match.
right. Yes. Yeah. And do we have to
I
raise?
think that's like very important is like a lot of these also include matches, which is like you have to find the money elsewhere to get this money. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But, if we're not able to do ambitious reporting, then people are less likely to invest in us, or donors are less likely to invest. So it really does become, I think, there's just a lot of problems. I'm excited about it. I think it's fun to try to, raise money to support and sustain local news, but I think it requires an education piece for the public that we're not so good at talking about. And I think that this is why we decided to create Behind the Beacon, this podcast, to
Yeah.
talk about like the nuts and bolts of how to make a news organization run so that people understand that there is an infrastructure that each news organization has to create, and that infrastructure is not created in a vacuum. There are like some real structural pressures, et cetera, that we face, and the infrastructure is just as important as the news that's produced, because without the proper sort of organizational and financial support, we can't do what we need to do editorially.
Yeah. And, I've been saying it since we started the Beacon. Like, this funding news is not a solved problem.
No.
It's not been solved yet. There are some organizations that have been able to figure out how to make it work and how to be profitable. New York Times, but they're also a very old organization with all the cachet in the world,
Yes.
and I think that new news orgs like ours, that's 5 years old, right? That didn't really start gaining traction until, the second or third
Yeah.
year.
Yeah.
I think it's that much harder, right? But like you need the new news organizations because the old ones are hollowed out or have shuttered, right?
Yes.
So then you have these new ones and it's even harder for new ones to find the money because we're new.
Yeah. Right.
You know? Like
But I think that one of the solves, and I was just at the Lenfest and Press Forward journalism conference a few weeks ago, and like if you think about it, if anyone who's listening knows anything about personal finance, which I am like a personal finance nerd, I listen to personal finance podcasts, etc. But like people as on the individual level make money through the acquisition of assets or through investments that then yield returns on those investments. It is
yeah.
the same at the corporate level. So, news organizations that, for example, are able to raise, let's say, $1 million in endowment funds or $2 million in endowment funds. For anyone who's not familiar with that, endowments are like a big chunk of money that is gifted to an organization typically, and it could be earmarked for a purpose or it could just be sort of general operating. That organization puts that money in an account that is invested in the market.
interest,
earning
right.
interest, yielding some return on investments, and then
Yeah,
there is a rate of withdrawal, typically around 4 or 5%, that news organization, if there's $2 million and in an account somewhere, the news organization is drawing 4 to 5% of that $2 million per year, while that money is earning even more interest and continuing to
right.
grow, and just spending a portion of those funds. And that's really a way that news organizations
Yes,
remain sustainable and viable, because suddenly, instead of having to raise, like, we have to raise $400,000 a year, roughly. If we had an endowment, we might have to raise $150,000 a year, $200,000 a year,
right,
while our endowment funds are growing and we're drawing from those funds to pay for
right.
our standard expenses. So that's really how, like, news organizations can be sustainable and not have restrictions and not be dealing with, corporate
Yeah,
greed or whatever. But that is really hard for news organizations, in particular younger news organizations. And we have an added challenge that we are a mission driven for profit news organization. And a lot of times when people invest in an endowment, they want to do so in a tax deductible manner. Now, we do have a fiscal sponsor, and so people can give us money that we can then run through that fiscal sponsor and establish the equivalent of an endowment. But there's all these complexities. And I think that that's something that we're working to educate the public about, what we need to,
right.
to be supported and sustainable.
Yeah, it's like McDonald's, right? Like McDonald's, its money is in its real estate.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
That's, like it's definitely, once you have the money, as it is with any kind of finance, once you have the money will make money.
Yes.
But if you don't have the money and your run rate is higher than your revenue, then that's the problem. You
Right.
know what I mean? Like if you don't have enough money to have the interest bearing part be covering your costs, then you're constantly scrambling to get the money.
Yeah.
And that's the way it is with any startup, unless the startup goes and gets some angel investor to give you a bunch of money. You know what I mean? But there has to be more money than what you need to do the job.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the other challenge that news organizations face, right? Like, if I'm investing in a technology product, let's say, I want to give $1 million to some technology project. I don't have $1 million. I'm just giving this as an
Yeah,
example, but I know what that technology product is and what it's going to do and what it's going to do for me. And I, perceive some benefit, right, to the
right,
creation of that technology product. If I'm giving $1 million in a news organization, the benefit is a little less tangible. And in fact, that news organization might actually come and investigate me for some things that I'm doing behind the
right,
scenes. And so I think, a lot of times investors, when they give money, they expect to have a say in what is created, how the product goes. We can't, in good conscience, give people the
right,
ability to vote on or shape the news. No, they can earmark it for, we want you to do more environmental coverage, we want more
right,
homelessness coverage, we want this, but they can't dictate what we write about, or if we end up writing about them or someone connected to them in the course of our
right,
investigation. So it really does take an investor who sees that news is a public good and is willing to kind of ha- take their hands off the wheel and just say, here, we see the value in this and we want to support it, whether or
right,
not there's a direct benefit to us.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And investors often like to get returns too.
Right. 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 Which, yeah. Yeah.
Which, maybe someday.
Well, I mean, but it's not it's philanthropy. And so,
Yeah,
some
well,
people have DAFs and all sorts of things where they have to give a certain amount of money. And one of the things, I don't want to talk about just the negative things about the news. One of the really positive things about the news is, if you're giving money, let's say you're, giving $1,000 a year to some sort of public charity. Well, if you're giving money to children, that's wonderful. If you're giving money to the environment, that's wonderful. If you're giving money to, homelessness, like that's great. If you give money to a news organization, you are addressing all of those issues. So if you care about a
Right.
multitude of issues, sometimes
Right.
giving money to a news organization that is raising public awareness around all these issues is a really great return on your social
Yeah.
investment, so to speak.
Right. Yes. And there is the rise of social and benefit investing as like you're not trying to get a return on money,
Yeah.
but you're trying to get a return in the world being better.
Yeah.
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 So for someone who's watching this, for someone who's listening, is there something that they can do to make the world better, like insofar as the beacon is concerned? Like what can they do? How can they get involved?
Yeah. I mean, obviously they can send us money. I mean, I think that that's, we do beat this over the head, in this podcast that you can go to buckscountybeacon.com and hit the support the beacon button.
Yeah.
We also have a fiscal sponsor, as Dara said, and if someone wants to give us an endowment,
Yeah, right. Or a large dollar
donor advice
donation.
fund,
Yeah, right.
whatever you want. Yeah, Dara will take your email. Dara Lee.
I will, absolutely.
Um,
Yeah, right. Reach out to me. And for people who have questions, like, hey, I want to give money, but these are the things I care about, or I want to know where my dollars go. Like, please reach out. It's daralease@buckscountybeacon.com. And I'll talk to you. I mean, I'll talk to anyone about their interest in what we do, their concerns about, hey, like, I want to donate dollars, but I want to know, like, how many news pieces are produced as a result of this donation. And we will work with you to come up with something that really is a value add. One of the things that I personally love, and I've worked with funders on this in the past, is if someone says, you know what, I want to give you $10,000 over the course of 3 years or something. Like we can set that up. We can do all
yeah,
sorts of really interesting and creative things because I believe that we work for the community, and and so I want to know what the community likes, what they don't, what they want more of, and then also I think it's important for the community to support support the work that we do that keeps the community better. So
yeah.
but I'm excited to share this episode with people. I'm excited to link to the article in Dame Magazine, and people just want to talk with me or Emily about all things journalism. Like, you don't have to be a donor. We'll talk to anybody because it makes our
I
work
will
better.
talk to anybody.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But thank you so much for being part of this episode. I was animated about it because this is the stuff that I'm most passionate about.
Yeah, I love talking about it too.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll see you in a couple of weeks. If you want to support the Beacon, as Emily said, you can go to buckscountybeacon.com and click that support button. If you want to connect with me to have a conversation about all things revenue or news or commiserate, I'll treat you to a cup of coffee and we can talk about it. My email is daralease@buckscountybeacon.com. And I will use the $6 in revenue that we got from Facebook ads. Yeah. to go out with you for a cup
buy
of
a coffee.
Yeah. But anyways, thank you again. And this has been another episode of Behind the Beacon. Glad you could join us.
See you next time.